See, and it doesn't matter about what it pertained. It's about having an imagination and actually wanting to read something for the.
Did it have the ciphers in it?
Yes, it did.
Okay, that was my question.
You know,
Oh,
but
That
Are you
that's
suggest
interesting because you bring up the ciphers, and I think we were talking about before about and I think I brought up that there was this guy writing named Tritemius,
Mhm.
Trtgemius, and he wrote a book called Steganographica, and steganography is what they called ciphering back then. And it was 3 volumes, and they could never decipher the third volume. And to read it, it was all about how to summon angels to carry your messages. And the book was supposed to be how to get your messages through enemy lines and they'll never see them.
right.
And finally, some guy, I'd have to look it up. I think it was in the night. I mean, guys from the NSA, this was like a big thing. They were studying this. So this guy finally broke the code in the 80s, and I think it was the 80s or 90s. And it turned out that the whole thing was an instruction on how to write a letter that looked like something completely different and have a whole different message. So each one of the magical formulas would actually say something like, okay, this is how you do this. And it was like instructions, and it would say, so you can now say enemy troops are here, this, that. But anyone reading this is going to think it's and it's brilliantly done. And John Dee was very much into this. And this was, again, considered part of magic. They were all into like moving alphabets and around letters around. The Holy Kabbalah was gaining in popularity then, although it had been around for a while.
well, I
And
mean, yeah, you have everything is coded. If
they
you
loved it.
go to a Catholic mass, there and some of the chants and some of the way the lyrics in which they sing in some of these mass. So a part of the lyrics include the literal worship of Lucifer. They're literally saying in Latin how they are worshiping
Well, Christ
Lucifer.
is the bringer of light,
Bring
Lucifer. Yeah.
and there's duality in that which we have. I'm sure we discussed that link already. But yeah, but there is the what was told to the people and what the clergy know as their knowledge, their higher knowledge.
I mean,
And
have you ever
so,
been to midnight mass? My God, Christmas mass,
well,
midnight mass at Christmas.
Yep.
That is the most wonderfully pagan ceremony.
the only
GK
way I
GK
actually
Chesterton said that. He said if you want a real paganism, it's like it's not in the papers. It's not this. The only really pagan thing in the world today is the Catholic Church. And if you really
the
want to be a
Vatican
pagan, you got to
is
look to the
built
church.
on the hill of the world's most famous um, uh, 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 hill where you worship pagan gods or did witchcraft. That whole hill was taken over by I mean, but this is what you do whenever you conquer regions and you want to control the world. You move into a region, you try to take over the customs. If you're not going to slaughter everybody, you take over the customs and you start adapting their gods into your gods. So that Vatican
Well,
is a
the, the,
famous place
the
for that happening.
the pagan conversion was kind of interesting, and it was a lot more nuanced. And you do make a good point about the Vatican and Rome because the Pope, if you look carefully at the legal theory behind the papacy, is that I'll do the short version is it's basically a continuation of the Roman Empire, and the Pope is the last
Absolutely.
existing official of the Roman imperial government that you could argue is arguably the last official, and his title is Pontifex Maximus,
You are not
and that
wrong.
means he is the
Yeah.
overseer of all religious cults in Rome. Now, they made only Christianity legal, so that means in practice, his power is limited to Christianity. However, technically, he is chief of all pagan religions in Rome as well, which I always thought was very interesting.
Wow.
But the conversion to Christianity was very interesting and more nuanced than people think. There was actually G.K. Chesterton, who I quote a lot, pointed out that a lot of the conversion, they weren't really like threatening to burn people at the stake if they didn't convert. A lot of people were very interested in Christianity and converting because the traditional pagan religions didn't provide the kind of theological answers that people were looking for, and people were going to Mithraism people were going to the Isaiah mysteries, by which I do not mean the prophet Isaiah, but the goddess Isis. So there was a lot of interest in alternate spirituality, kind of like today, or at least in the 60s and 70s. And then, of course, the thing with the thing about Christianity was that I think the government saw that it was a useful tool. They wanted a unified religious, right? That's what they used to do with paganism. You had the cult of the emperor's genius. So you didn't really worship the emperor, but you worshiped the good luck of the emperor because the empire depended on it. You had all this stuff. Christianity was getting really big, and it was very uniform and very structured, a hell of a lot more than the pagan religions were. So the emperor just stepped in, and the next thing you know, it becomes the state religion, and the statues of Christ start looking an awful lot like Constantine. And, and you go from there. And suddenly you've got the state enforcing. I mean, it used to be they just argue. I mean, they'd have these church councils, and like the different bishops would bring their monks with them, and whoever had the most monks that could beat up the other monks would like win the argument, and they would. And obviously, the Holy Spirit moved upon these people. It's interesting. But then now you could have like, well, the emperor is going to exile you if you vote against this kind of stuff. So the state and the religion became, and I think the state won out. I mean, as far as influence.
And I love this. This is the only thing that really connects me with Warhammer 40K. It's for the simple fact the Imperium. They literally had a Council of Nicaea where they were to decide whether or not psyker powers would be used by the Space Marine legions, or anybody for that matter.
Yeah.
And it was decreed, no, this is bad. Nobody's just like
if you want to put that into context about what's going on here, when you look at the text, okay, the thing about it is, when it comes to the church, okay, they were terrified of this book because of John Dee's reaction to it. Because in the end, what happened was he was supposedly supposed to be talking to angels, okay, and one angel could tell you how to properly handle the book, while other ones would constantly warn you that if you used it improperly, then there were consequences that would be involved, okay. So he ended up getting so terrified by this that he set the book to the side and he didn't use it anymore. And and John Dee wasn't the kind of guy that got scared easily when it come to magic, okay, at all. So like, this influenced him so bad that it also influenced the people around him, and then people later on. So you had the church that people were afraid of, but then you also had what John Dee did that terrified him too. So if you didn't do these rituals or these certain things in a certain way that was pure and right and just, then there would be consequences, and it scared the heck out of people. So that's kind of why this book became infamous, basically.
Underneath that, it kind of reminds me of like the ancient like the Hebrew rabbis. They, exorcism. When you talk about the time period with Christ, exorcisms. Everybody was doing exorcisms back then. Like it was such a common thing that. And they had their own mysticisms, their own spells. They were right. Their spells on the caps of the skull caps of a human being, and write these things as warnings. A lot of times that would be buried underneath the let's say your front doorstep or something, and it's to ward off evil spirits, which is technically necromancy, but I don't want to get into that or make anyone mad. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, Roger also does make an important point, I think, where these things were like, they treated this the way we treat handling nuclear isotopes today. or like even just operating an X-ray machine where they put on the big lead shields and stuff. This was their rocket science. This was their high energy physics. They really felt like they were closing in on manipulating the very fabric of reality. They thought they were going to do it through prayer and angelic intervention. And, along the way, they mixed up some chemicals and came up with some important stuff. And again, they kind of separated out the stuff that worked more consistently. But at the time, a book like this was seen as potentially very dangerous, especially if not approached properly. And this is why you had the Index Prohibitorum. They weren't burning books for fun or because they, just were mean people that, people shouldn't be allowed to read that. They were really worried about. They thought these books were imperiling people's lives and worse, their souls, which they saw as a very real and important danger at that time. So to them, that justified stuff that we would not, I would never advocate burning a book, but to them, it was like disposing of radioactive waste.
We didn't have a leap in medical science until people started cutting up dead bodies,
Well, see what made another thing that made this book so dangerous is it didn't make the reader think that misuse of it was going to anger a god. Okay, instead it said that misuse would literally damage that person. You know what I mean? You will be damaged, period. It won't be from a god. But because of your misuse, you will be personally damaged because of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That gives a lot of responsibility to the user because at that point you are kind of you're not God, but you're a little G, right? You're a little God. That gives us that psychic or magical or sovereign entity feel, right?
It's
an important warning.
I'm just thinking, isn't one of the points of the split from Catholicism to Anglo-Christian was to dispel some of the mysticism, to move some of the more extreme mysticism?
Well,
yeah. Well, I mean, what level of mysticism are we talking about? You know what I mean? Because they just kind of like went from one form to another. Because like,
I think I know what Mark's talking about because, the creation of the Anglican Church, and Mark probably knows more about the detail. I wish Bob were here because Bob knows a lot about the church, but Mark, I think what you're talking about are the currents in Protestant thought at the time. Guys like Calvin, and I believe Calvinism influenced Anglicanism to a certain degree, or guys like Wycliffe. A lot of guys who were very iconoclastic. They read the Bible in the vernacular. They're suddenly like, hey, they didn't say anything in here about incense, cloth of gold, and archbishops and cardinals having jeweled mitres and red hats and stuff, right? So, and they took that to an extreme with the Puritans. And on the other hand, you also had in the particular Anglican split, this was a top-down political move. I mean, politics and the church were basically the same thing at the time. Bishops of city-states in Germany were quite common, and one day your prince bishop might be a Catholic bishop, and then somebody dies, someone inherits, and guess what? He's a Protestant bishop. And the whole country is now officially Protestant. And, you just take down the crucifix, put up the plain cross, and keep bringing the cash in. It's just not going to Rome now. So, but it was more than just religious belief. A lot of political things pushed this too. And I think there were also politics behind the simplifying of the liturgy, doing away with very expensive. And that was another thing about the Anglican Church too. When Henry basically looted the monasteries and churches, Glastonbury's gone. Huge amounts of statuary, books and things were destroyed.